Diksha. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for coming. And audience, we have an esteemed panel with us. We're going to get right into it. Raj, I'm going to go to the far corner first. Let's begin. Diksha has given us a brief introduction on the CEOs, but I would like you to please take a couple of minutes and share with the audience a little bit more about yourself and your organization's global and regional presence, please.
Sure. Been with Marriott close to 17 years as part of the Starwood acquisition, which happened about a year ago now. 23rd of this month would be 1 full year. Our size in Asia increased dramatically. So today, across Asia, we are 600 operating hotels with a pipeline of another 550. In my world, which is all of Asia Pacific except Greater China, we just crossed 300 hotel threshold with a pipeline of another 276 hotels. Exciting times. We have 30 brands now, and things are going really well from an integration point of view. So for us, we are excited about the future.
Thank you, Raj. Peter, over to you.
Hey, I, earlier this year, joined a newly formed hotel investment platform called Lodgis. And Lodgis was formed through a joint venture between Warburg Pincus, the private equity group, and Vina Capital, among one of the largest investment managers in Vietnam. The early activities of our business have been in Vietnam itself, where Vina Capital, through their work, has allowed us to seed this platform with a couple of very prime assets. In addition to that, we have acquired a fully integrated operating company and development platform under the brand Fusion, which we're driving in that country. Our aspirations are to build a hotel investment and operating enterprise across the Asia-Pacific region on the back of this initial work, and Indonesia is one of our prime targets. Prior to joining Lodgis, as was mentioned in the introduction, I ran Host Hotels Asia-Pacific business, where we were active in the region, particularly in India, God help me, and Australia and New Zealand. And previous to that, I held a number of executive positions as an investment banker, please don't hold that against me, as well as in the private equity world and as an independent investment manager and development executive in Japan.
Splendid. Thank you. Exciting times ahead, Peter. Nicholas, over to you, please.
Thank you. Hello. Nicholas Clayton with Capella Hotel Group. We are in the luxury and ultra-luxury segment, a small company. The brand was born about 15 years ago, and we have presence in Germany, in Mexico, in the Caribbean, which I'm watching very closely as we speak. We also have a hotel under the Capella brand in Singapore, and we just opened our Shanghai property September 1st. We have some other exciting projects that we're working under the Capella brand. One is here in Bali, in Ubud, a luxury tent project that is very exciting. We hope to launch that in February of 2018, as well as the Capella in Bangkok on the Chao Phraya River, which will launch in October of 18. That was not my stomach. That was a technical difficulty. We have two marquee projects that we're also working on. One in the Maldives and one in downtown Sydney. So we're going to, in the next couple of years, we're going to form a cluster in the region of 6, 7 of these very high-end Capella hotels, and I believe that will really propel the brand into new heights. We also have a brand called Solis that is a notch down, and we have a number of hotels under development on that brand as well. So thank you very much. Glad to be here today.
John, finally over to you, a very well-known brand, of course, in Indonesia. Would you
Well,
please?
in Indonesia, yeah, we're here. I'm from the Archipelago group. We have some brands here, 8 brands. We're predominantly from Indonesia. The company is a private company held by myself and my partner, Charles Brookfield. Originally, I'm from Ireland. Charlie's American. Both of us took Indonesian citizenship about 8 to 10 years ago. So we're an Indonesian company. We started off here about 15 years ago developing the various brands. At the moment, we have a portfolio here of about 135 hotels open and another 85 under construction, various stages of construction. We do from 2-star hotels to 5-star hotels, and we're also getting into the luxury hostel segment at the moment. In the future, we're looking to expand overseas. We've set up everything here for the last 10 years, and we're pretty happy the way things are, so we're starting to expand overseas. Now we have some agreements in Cuba, the Middle East, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, India, Malaysia, Thailand, and so forth, places like that. Our general kind of goal is to develop in developing countries. That's more where our passion. We're not that interested in developing in places like Europe or America, first world countries. Our passion is in dealing with places like Indonesia. We enjoy working in countries like this, setting up the systems, our infrastructure, our system, our organizational architecture is set up to deal with the Indonesian staff, the Indonesian systems, the Indonesian market. So we're looking to bring that now to different places around the world. Most of our hotels at the moment we have are 90% under management. We have about 8% under franchise, some are under licensing agreements, and then a couple of them we develop ourselves. As Indonesians, we can buy the land, build the hotels, borrow from the bank, so it makes things a lot easier when we're developing our own projects and so forth. So in the future, we hope to have about 500 hotels in Indonesia in the next 10 years, and we hope to have about 200 to 300 in different places around the world, predominantly through franchise agreements, master franchise agreements, area development agreements, and so forth. So,
Thank you. Thank you, John. Let's jump into a bit of specifics and let's talk Indonesia. Raj, it's an open-ended question, but do tell us what attracts Marriott to Indonesia and what frustrates Marriott about the same place.
So, like any other major emerging economy, Indonesia has phenomenal potential. Just look at the population base, the growing middle class. We have 40 operating hotels, about 8,500 rooms, another 35 odd under construction. We see great opportunity as this country grows. So from long-term perspective, we are invested. We see decades-long growth story here. What frustrates us is that really it's been a story of 2 cities predominantly, be it Jakarta or Bali, and that is slowly changing. And I think it's important that as we work with other private and government partnerships, that we continue to focus on other destinations across Indonesia because it has just immense potential in terms of future.
Great. Peter, I'm going to probably ask you the same question, but more from an investment standpoint, I assume. Is this a market you're looking at seriously from an investment eye?
In a word, absolutely. For all the reasons that Rajeev cited in terms of the burgeoning middle class, the growth. Our shareholders are growth investors, and this country clearly falls within our crosshairs. So very much for us, the challenge would be, there are a number of, because we're not just interested in the real estate, we are looking to also invest in operating platforms, and there are a number of interesting operating platforms in the country, and it's just a matter of being able to buy in at a value that allows us to see our way towards, opportunistic returns, so north of 20% IRR. So that would be the challenge, but the fundamentals are excellent, and clearly this is one of the places that we hope will underpin the strategy of building our business.
I guess later in the conversation, I'm going to come back to you on what are some of the key things one can do to get those 20% plus IRRs.
I was afraid of that.
Yeah. Nicholas, you have some presence in Bali already. You also mentioned you're building something in Ubud now that you'll be managing. Is Indonesia front and center as far as Capella's growth strategy in Asia Pac is concerned, or what's your plan?
Yeah, I think it's undeniably a regional and actually global favorite spot here in Bali, and I think that I the span time I've been coming here, which is a number of years, it's changed dramatically, but its popularity has just grown and grown and grown. And I think to be here, given our bases in Singapore, makes a lot of sense for us. So we are currently managing Ayana here in Bali, and then have 2 projects in Ubud. So we're kind of high on the destination, and I think that, you know, Jakarta, Surabayas of the world have great potential. I mean, Indonesia has not only great domestic potential for any given hotel, but also I'm interested in the outbound travel and the brand awareness within the country, so that I can, you know, make sure that we get our share of Indonesian travelers as they go into Thailand and travel into Singapore and other destinations where we have product.
Sure. John, we've heard, I guess, what's good with Indonesia and what works here. You're not only a citizen of this country now, but you've been doing business here for a decade and a half. Let's talk a little bit about the challenges and like I asked Raj, what's really frustrating you about this market? What do we want changed?
Well, some of the obvious factors, I mean, if people are driving around Bali, you'll see that Bali itself, and Jakarta is moving forward, Bali itself hasn't really developed as much as the infrastructure in a lot of places that they need it. I mean, for example, there's no mass rapid transit system here in Bali, like monorails or underground systems or major bus systems or anything like that. And Jakarta is kind of a similar way, although Jakarta is probably maybe 4 or 5 years ahead of Bali in developing these kind of systems. I mean, Jakarta itself is developing a monorail system, an underground system, so forth. Also, finally, a train system going from the center of Jakarta to the airport in Jakarta, which will make a big difference on the airport road. Bali itself needs stuff like that. I mean, apart from the infrastructure, the airport was very good, but unfortunately, the max capacity of the airport isn't being reached at a pace fast enough that would be comparable to other places around the world. I mean, there's many airports, brand new airports that are built. Okay, we're going from 25 million capacity to 50 million capacity, and then normally that's reached between 5 and 10 years. But Bali is going to be a little bit behind that, you know. I mean, you get a lot more visitors coming to Bali and Jakarta and stuff like that, but the problem is that the average length of stay is less and the average length of spend is less. So you have, for example, Chinese tourists who are coming in big numbers, but they're only spending 25% of what a European tourist spends. There's a problem. So apart from the infrastructure, then the other problem then is if you take a country like Singapore leading the way in developing attractions for people, casinos, Formula One events, many different things. Bali itself hasn't really developed that kind of stuff. I mean, you have a Garuda, Wisma Garuda statue, which is fantastic, but it's not exactly Disney Bali or Universal Studios Bali or other stuff like this. So people can find stuff to do in Bali for 2 or 3 days, but after that, you're kind of struggling, okay, what do you do next, you know? So Bali and Jakarta in general, they need to be developing these kind of stuff. Disneylands, Universal Studios, casinos, maybe not possible, but I mean, if Malaysia could do it, there's no reason why Bali couldn't do it, you know? So apart from the infrastructure and then events and things to do on an international scale is what's really needed, you know?
Fair enough. Thank you. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, Raj. I'm going to ask you something specific to your organization. Marriott, and now with an equally big giant now a part of the Marriott team, Marriott Starwood, all being one big company, the biggest, I would imagine, on the planet. One of the tenets of Marriott that we've always read has always been that if you take care of your employees, they take care of your guests. On the same tangent, there is undistinguishably a challenge with quality availability of talent across the globe. And this is not unique to Indonesia, it's not unique to Asia Pac, it's a global challenge. How is Marriott managing this? Do you first agree that it's a challenge, and two, what are you guys doing to fix this?
You know, it is a challenge, and from my perspective, will remain for a few years. And although the reality in Asia, in most parts of Asia, is that there is availability of local talent. It really is, as a lot of these kids coming out of school, are they skilled enough or are they employable? So the focus that we've had as an organization in places like Indonesia and other emerging markets across Asia is to invest heavily in our training programs, you know, be it through our management trainee or Voyager programs or other number of internal programs that we have to develop local talent. And you know, years ago, you look at a market like Indonesia, and we'd have very few local general managers or local ex-com positions. Today, almost 70-75% of our general managers coming through the ranks are now starting to become locals, and you're really finding expats in places like Bali or probably Jakarta. And I think the other key focus for us is diversification, which is really looking at, developing women leaders, and we've seen some really good, over the last couple of years, women general managers develop within Indonesia itself. And I think that's where I see considerable opportunity as we continue to grow. It's not only about investing in the local talent, but also developing, investing in diversity.
Thank you. Peter, I told you I was going to come back to this. So let's skip the IRR part of it, but let's move on to valuations. Given that you've had this career with JP Morgan over the years and with Host as an investment vehicle and now with Lodgis, I think it'd be interesting to get your view on how valuations are presently stated and how they're likely to move in emerging economies, and that may not be unique to Indonesia, but several economies in the APAC region that are emerging in their nature.
Sure, sure. I mean, the challenge and difficulty that we have, and a lot of folks that do what we do has, is, basically, owners of these businesses being prepared to sell meaningful positions, because again, we're looking to invest in platforms, not necessarily just individual assets. So part of that is the challenge. So there's a paucity, particularly, this is the topic here is Southeast Asia, so particularly in Southeast Asia, it's really slim pickings in terms of being able to identify these kinds of businesses to invest in. But the other side is just valuation expectation, as I think you allude to, and there really is a gap. I'm not even talking necessarily between the fact that we're, you could argue, greedy in terms of the kind of returns that we're trying to generate, but even separate from that, I think that the expectations of what the value is to these businesses tends to be inflated to the true enterprise, enterprise number that you might see. So it's difficult. It's difficult. Now that said, we wouldn't be putting this business together if we didn't think there was indeed an opportunity to do this. And listen, we've done it in Vietnam with the acquisition of Fusion brand, and we're at the moment we're in a number of dialogues with different groups to be able to buy into it. But it is challenging, both in terms of the operating platforms and in terms of the asset valuations. And if you look at JLL statistics on where transactions have happened, at the end of the day, there's very little that has happened in Southeast Asia over time. There's really big pockets of secondary market activity and liquidity, and those are the more developed markets, places like Japan and Australia, where it's happened. So what really needs to, I think, take place, and not that I'm wishing misfortune on anyone, is old-fashioned distress where people are forced to have to restructure their balance sheet and do things, and that's a way that, again, we're not grave dancers like Sam Zell, but that would be the situation where we could step in and probably put deals together. Otherwise, not to say we won't be able to, but there are certainly challenges.
Sure. So Nicholas, taking a cue from what Peter was saying, and I tend to agree that more mature markets, whether it's Singapore, Hong Kong, or Tokyo, are the ones that really see transactions. But if we were to look at relatively maturing economies such as Indonesia, one of the thoughts that comes to my mind is that you could enhance value as an owner by doing branded residential developments in conjunction with the hotel, and that's not uncommon in Bali. Do you see a market for that in Indonesia? Do you see branded resis adding value to the overall project, and do you see room for that kind of business?
I think that it's tried and true that residential combined with the hotel product is an excellent financing vehicle. And we have our project here in Ubud where there's a small residential sale play, and it is there mainly to facilitate the overall financing of the hotel. And so yes, when it makes sense and there's a strong market, we're all for that kind of security of having that bit of capital be part of the financing. So
I'm just going to dig in a little deeper with this on this one with you, Nicholas. I tend to agree that it makes business sense to do this if the market exists. Just in studying the Indonesian and specifically the Bali market at HVS, what we've observed is that while there is a market, there is a significant gestation period or what you would call sales pace. It often takes 6, 7, 8 years before you can actually offload the inventory. Therefore, it may not be necessarily the highest and best use of your money and time to do that. Perhaps if you were to do it in smaller numbers, and I guess what I'm saying is just sharing a view and wondering if you agree, that while there may be an opportunity to do that, doing that in large numbers and the tail wagging the dog, so to speak, may not be the solution.
Yes, very much in our particular case, the project I have in mind, it's very much an incremental number of units, very manageable and not a big play. But I think that each market is different and individual and unique, and I think that we tend to be on the smaller side generally. So for us, the resi play would always be quite small as far as a component to a larger development.
Okay. John, let's try and understand a little bit from you about the fact that you are essentially an Indonesian homegrown brand, and Archipelago is a very well-known name in this country. What, to your mind, are some of the competitive advantages that you bring to the table to the ownership community here, for instance, that perhaps Raj and Nicholas cannot?
Well, after so many years' experience working here, we understand the ins and outs of constructions and dealing with staffing and management and so forth. From a management point of view, we're very good at, our bread and butter is basically the mid-market. We can get quite a bit of money out of, generate as much money as possible out of a mid-class hotel and drive a lot of that money through to the bottom line, through the various systems that we use and through centralized standards and systems. One of the things we also do is, we have 15,000 staff in the country, but since the beginning we've had the policy that none of them would be expats. They're all Indonesian staff, actually. We don't hire expats to be general managers. So the way that's worked out over the years is that, for example, from a 2-star hotel to a 4-star hotel, we can take the front office manager, for example, in a 4-star hotel, and then he becomes a hotel manager in a 2-star hotel. So we get a lot of movement across that, and basically the way we set it up in the beginning was all the hotels use the same kind of system. It's just for a 2-star hotel, they're more simple, and then they get a bit more complicated as they go on. And that's the same from the hardware and the design part of it, from the size of the rooms, the specifications for the rooms, the mechanical, the electrical, the plumbing, the interior design and so forth, all the way through to the soft part, to the services, service standards, service setups and so forth. So when the guys move around between the group, they can easily latch on to the different managerial toolboxes that's available to them. So this helps really a lot drive down costs. And for example, in an optimum hotel where we build it ourselves, like one of our own hotels, and we can get the energy cost down to, like, for example, last month the energy cost was 3.3%. Wow. There's not many hotels around the world where you go, okay, the energy cost is 3.3% or the staffing cost is 15%. But when we're at those mid-class hotels, if it's in the right location, the right concept, the right build, the right type of owner, you can get those kind of profits where you're doing 50% GOP on a normal 3 or 4-star hotel. So this is what we've been kind of bringing in. Anybody we've had a hotel, for example, and it's been taken over by a global brand, after that the performance goes down. The revenue actually goes down, and they don't bring, if you're in a place like Bali or Jakarta, it works, but if you're in a secondary or tertiary city like Bandung or Makassar or Medan or something like that, the international brands don't bring that kind of extra revenue, extra membership, extra fat going through the system. So in that kind of way, we can bring in actually more business, and then we can drive more of that business down to the bottom line, So that's what we kind of bring. We're not interested in working with people who are not serious about making money. People come to us and they say, I want it for my family, or I want it for this, or I don't mind what I spend on advertising. That's not the kind of people we're interested in working at, We're interested in people like running a business, running a hotel, doing good service, but at the end of the day, making a decent profit,
Just as a side note, am I right in my understanding that Archipelago is the biggest hotel company in India in terms of, or in Indonesia in terms of?
Yeah, we're not in India.
Yeah, not in India yet, yeah.
But we're the biggest by number of hotels, but Accor is biggest by the number of hotel. Like Accor would do hotels, for example, like with 600 rooms, 500 rooms. In Indonesia, we wouldn't do that. We do that in the Philippines. We have some hotels that are 450 rooms, but in Indonesia, we don't really see that kind of demand for hotels. Like the maximum size hotel we do in Indonesia, we've had 350 keys.
Sure. Thank you. Raj, earlier today, Manav made a speech on management contracts and the space that they're in. Given that you're conceivably the largest management company on the planet now, what I wanted to ask you was, do you honestly believe management contracts in this part of the world are fair to the owners? Would you, in other words, if you were a hotel owner, sign with Marriott, and why?
Let me answer it in another way. Today, we have 600 hotels operating. By 2020, we will be 1,000 hotels. And a big part of our growth is with hotel owners that already have operating hotels with us. So that tells you that as a brand, as a company, we've got to be delivering great returns for them to come back to us. So, in our belief, management agreements, for any business to be successful, they need to be long-term agreements. They need to provide stability, and as a result, we are able to then drive high returns. And it is now proven, when you look at Marriott stock or you look at our growth with our existing partners, that as a company, we've done a fairly decent job over the number of years. So from my perspective, management agreements need to create a great balance for both parties, and I think generally they do. Each individual owner negotiates, and there is a little bit of give and take, but overall, the agreements we operate with are very healthy agreements that serve purpose for both sides. And at the end of the day, they are like prenup agreements, right? You don't run to an agreement if there's an issue. I rarely see a case where one would reach out and start pulling out an agreement. You typically sit and solve issues through relationships. So that's how Asia has worked for years. But a management agreement provides us the safeguard and also the ownership.
So you will forgive me if I persist a little bit on this. And
Sure.
what you've explained, and I tend to agree wholeheartedly, is that you're a good management company and a great brand that delivers honest value to its owners. My question is the contract fair? I agree that you're a great performer, but is the contract fair? Would you agree that let's not single Marriott out? Are global hotel management companies generally offering fair contracts in Asia Pacific?
I think they are. Again, if I was an owner, I would negotiate in my own way. But I think at the end of the day, what a management company is expected to bring is to deliver, great brand, which helps with the increase in valuation, because we often tend to forget that for the real estate. We bring great top line, and we are expected to deliver great bottom line, which means long-term sustainable business. And as long as a company, we continue to deliver that, I think the contracts are fair. And Marriott has over and over proven this point that over long term, our results are generally pretty strong in most markets that we operate in.
Okay, fair argument. I buy it. Thank you. Peter, just having been in the hotel business in different shapes and sizes over the years, I'm going to ask you something with regards to the new age of hotels. I mean, Airbnb is a reality of today. It's a significant force to reckon with in most parts of the Western world. I think it's penetrating this part of the world quite ably as well. One fine stay, another brand that Accor acquired not too long ago. Two is looking at the upper echelons of hospitality and is competing with the luxury players of today. In your view, are these new age styles of hospitality impacting the traditional hotels?
In a word, absolutely. In a word, absolutely. But it depends. I mean, that's generally speaking. It really depends on where you sit in the spectrum in terms of product and location. But this is really, in my view, the first time in decades where you have what I would consider to be a major structural change to the business. Our business, generally speaking, there have been things here and there, but this is the first time I think that the fundamentals of how the business operates, with the so-called disruptor of these disintermediators that are coming in, Airbnb and the like, And what in effect they are is it's a burst of new supply that didn't exist before, you know, in the simplest terms. It's new supply. Now, if you're a luxury hotel sitting in a prime location, you know, city center, and you have a loyal customer base that, you know, wants to go to a Capella or a Marriott or whatever, and they're looking for the full suite of services and everything else, and they have points through the frequent traveler program and all this, these kinds of players are going to be less of a threat. But there are certain product types. If you're a mid-scale property in a particular place, there's a segment of the market that says, wow, they like the idea of this, you know, some of it's folksy product, some of it is kind of laying closer to the community and all these things, aspects that you don't get with traditional hotels. But clearly, I think what you do have is you have a burst of supply, and that's going to have an impact on certain segments of the business. In my previous incarnation with Host, the kind of product that we had, which was namely, you know, a lot of prime city center or prime resort properties, the Airbnb model is less of a threat. But depending on what you have and what your wares are, clearly it's a challenge. And I think that the merger activity that you've seen amongst the operators, you know, Exhibit A to my left, is a function of a defensive move against this structural change.
And if I may just add to that and tell me if you agree, Peter, even from a valuation standpoint, Airbnb is right up there with the Marriott and the Hiltons of the world, if I'm not wrong. And I mean, they're at a 25 billion, if I'm, or in that general space, which would probably also point to the fact that everybody sees the merit and the value in these companies actually being worthy competitors.
Sure. Now, valuations at any given point may be wrong, but over the long term, a free market, buying and selling, they tend to be right. But yeah, that tells you that the market expectation at this point is this is a business that has legs and will grow, and there's value embedded in that.
Sure.
I don't know the relative EBITDA of an Airbnb against a Marriott to see how it's valued, so what is the multiple?
Sure.
I suspect the multiple is much higher because it's on the basis of an expectation of hockey stick growth.
Possibly.
Yeah, possibly.
All right, I'm going to skip you for a moment. Nicholas, come to you first, John, and then go to Nick. You do operate in the mid-scale space, as you mentioned earlier. Are you dealing with this challenge that I just brought up? Is Airbnb a challenge? Is it just a worthy competitor? Are you even noticing their existence?
Yeah, I mean, we notice their existence, but I think for the last 10 years, the way people are using hotels, I mean, especially also the market is traveling a lot more. If you're talking about millennials, like most four guys here, you know, young millennials traveling a lot. The way people are using hotels these days and the reasons they're staying in them is a little bit different than it was before. People these days, and also, for example, in Indonesia, I mean, Indonesia, you talk about 12 to 20 million people, foreign tourists, but Indonesia itself has, you know, domestic tourism is up between 150 and 180 million a year. It's huge. But people in general, the way they're working, the way you can work outside an office in different places, people are traveling a lot more now. People are working from home, working from different locations. So people are, I mean, there's many people in Bali now working in Bali, and just, you know, they're working for a company in Europe, but they're based in Bali, they're working here. So the way hotels now are developing, you see people are going a lot more for, like, you know, luxury hostels, for example, or other hotels, which the social spaces, the lounges, the lobbies, I mean, they're all integrated. They give a lot more opportunity for guests to integrate with each other, to meet other people. People are just more singles traveling, there's more couples traveling, but at the end of the day, they want to meet other people. One of the problems you have when you're staying in Airbnb is it's difficult, you know, if you don't have a local number, you can't order food, you can't order a taxi to come to your place. So there is issues with it, where if you're in a hotel, you can get a taxi, you can get a room service, you can get other bits and pieces, there's other facilities for it and stuff like that. So for us, we don't see, I mean, Airbnb hasn't affected our business at all. Okay. It just hasn't, you know. If you're in a place, I understand, like Amsterdam or Paris or Rome or something like that, where there's so few hotels and so much demand, and people can, you know, give up the safety and security of a hotel for the inconvenience of staying in somebody's apartment for a cheaper rate, yeah, they'll do it. But in Asia, apart from Singapore, for example, maybe Bangkok, I don't really see that, you know. I see people just still staying in hotels. And domestic tourism here, I mean, say for example, there's 200 million people coming into Southeast Asia this year from outside for tourists. I mean, by 2020, that's going to be 400. It's up to 8-12% growth a year. So there's still plenty of people coming into the region. You know, I don't see Airbnb is going to have such a big impact on hotels. Yeah.
Thank you. Nicholas, now that John brought up the millennial conversation, and the fact is that it is generally assumed that the millennials have what most people like to qualify as challenges or weaknesses of being impatient and wanting instant gratification and wanting a sense of receiving what is due to them and so on and so forth. There's a lot of blame that's put on the millennials. I know you have a counter view on this. Would you care to share that with the audience?
He's going to take private conversations and make them public. No, that's fine, thank you. You know, I think that I guess trying to kind of maintain a youthful mindset, I come from a place that I want the same things that a millennial does. And people that have a more conservative, maybe people that are even more mature than myself, they would have a different point of view, and as they choose their travel options and so forth, and as they choose service experiences. But for me, I want to, you know, to expedite and make sure that I can, my wife and I, when we travel, that all of our, you know, all of our devices are, you know, easily, you know, plugged in, easily working, and that the hotel would facilitate this. That's not a, I don't think that's an exclusive millennial need. I think, you know, I know lots of families, they have 2 children, they're young, you know, adult children. You know, they have, you know, 8, 9, 10 devices between them all. So that's a heavy user. And I think this issue of, you know, having great Wi-Fi services for millennials is really a blanket issue. I think active social spaces, hotels have always had this in some way, shape, or form. The fact that you might drop a few walls down and it may not be boxed in, it may be an integrated part of the lobby in which people use the lobby lounge to do different types of work and meetings. This has been going on a long time. The fact that we think that it's a millennial issue, I don't believe is the case. I think, as far as I know, millennials want the same functionality of a guest room. They want the same comfort of a guest room. They may not be in a position to pay for the finer appointments or the finishes and so forth. But, you know, generally speaking, you know, people are people. So I think when it comes to managing your workforce and what the expectations may be, that could be very much a different issue. It is. But from a customer standpoint, you know, I think that, say in the luxury space, that luxury hotels better start becoming a bit more lifestyle in their offerings going forward. I mean having, you know, a little hipper design, paying more attention to lighting, paying more attention to music, you know, making sure that some of these issues are dealt with. So otherwise, you know, they'll be lost in the shuffle. So yeah, I think it's not something to be oblivious around, but at the same time, I just look at, you know, the consumers going forward as being a group of people that are really looking for similar attributes in their accommodation.
Thank you, Nicholas. I thought that was an interesting perspective, which is why I brought it up, and I think everybody would tend to agree. Raj, you guys acquired Starwood. Accor acquired FRHI, and then bought stake in Banyan Tree, and they acquired One Fine Stay, and there have been other similar acquisitions in many parts of the world. A popular domestic chain in India sold to Louvre Hotels out of Paris, so on and so forth. Do you see this as, do you expect this to keep going on? Are you seeing further consolidation most expectedly?
I think there's opportunity for more. You know, as Peter mentioned earlier, some of it by big companies is defensive play, because as OTAs, Airbnb continue to grow, scale matters at the end of the day. In our world, you know, when we look at 6,200 odd hotels, 100 million loyal members, growing at million members a month, that's considerable when you're sitting at a negotiating table against an OTA. And that does end up getting us the best commission rates or control of our inventory. So I think some of these mergers or acquisitions will continue just by the nature of how the business dynamics are changing. But a lot will depend by market specifically.
And I'm going to stick with you for another moment, just on the topic of emerging destinations. To your mind, outside of the obvious destinations that we all aware of in Southeast Asia and South Asia at large, what is really the next frontier? Where do you see further growth coming up in terms of supply and opportunity for both developers and brands?
I see a fair bit of movement now in Cambodia within the ASEAN set of 10 countries. Myanmar is opening up considerably, so there's some opportunities there. And you know, again, when you look at markets like Vietnam and Philippines, even there are great locations that'll end up becoming big destinations in the future. I was just talking earlier about Phu Quoc as an example, south of Vietnam, which has the potential to become a Phuket of tomorrow. So it really depends how much, you know, infrastructure grows into these destinations, but there's considerable opportunities. But I really see places like Cambodia and Myanmar.
Thank you. Peter, I'm going to probably ask the same question to you a little bit differently, though. Lodgis, from an investment as well as from an operations standpoint, what markets are seeming most attractive to you? Where do you want to grow next? And is it exclusive to Southeast Asia, or are you looking to broaden your horizons?
Right. Well, our stated aim, and life sort of happens while you're planning. When we formed the vehicle and platform, the idea was to focus on Southeast Asia. But of course, at the end of the day, you're opportunistic and things come up. So some of it is, I'm not trying to sort of sit on the fence on your question, but some of it really is a matter of opportunity. I think ultimately, as I was saying earlier, Southeast Asia generally is a harder nut to crack in terms of deals, and so we're open to the possibility. In fact, we're looking at a couple of things now in the Maldives. So now all of a sudden we're in the Indian Ocean looking at some things. So some of it is to a certain extent opportunistic. Clearly Southeast Asia has the right kind of growth profile, and that we talked earlier about Indonesia, for example, where we're sitting now. So clearly we're going to continue to spend time there, but ultimately if something opened up and it wasn't in necessarily a place that we had originally contemplated, like a Maldives, we would clearly look at it. In the case of the Maldives, we have a certain product type within our Fusion brand, and there's an opportunity there where we could potentially flag something with that. So I think, the idea in investing, because I've seen it, is if you get too narrow, it can be very challenging. So I think you need to be fleet of foot and nimble in your investment strategy based on the opportunities before you. So again, life happens while you're making plans, kind of thing.
Thank you, Peter. Nicholas, on the topic of investments, I was wondering, does the Capella Group have intentions, or will they be open to equity infusion or joint ventures or investment-led growth?
There was a consolidation and a purchase that was made about 4 months ago now, and so there was a procurement of the Capella and Solis brands by Pontiac Land Group 4 months ago. So now single shareholder, based in Singapore, reputation for developing high quality products in their business for the last 60 years in Singapore. And so it's a kind of a bright time for the potential of us to invest in. And in fact, of course, our parent company owns the Singapore property. They are the owners of the Sydney development that is underway, and of course are the developing business behind our Maldives project. So they are putting their balance sheet to work to grow the Capella brand and are interested in select investments going forward. Those select investments usually where obviously it meets many of the criteria they're looking for, including being the dominant, if not the 100% shareholder.
Okay, thank you. John, I was reading up on the internet a little bit about your career prior to Archipelago, just so that I could have a better sense. And I understand you've spent a fair amount of time in Dublin, London, Paris, Copenhagen prior to moving to Indonesia. What prompted this move to Indonesia all these years ago? And I guess my second, that may be a short answer, but I guess what I'm more interested in is, how do you see this market, and what are the differences really between business and culture between here and how you did business in Western Europe?
Night and day.
Yeah, well, it's pretty funny because I came from, originally I was in Copenhagen before here, where the workplace, the way hotels are run, the way restaurants are run, the food and beverage industry is run is much different. And of course, but I mean, at the same time, a lot of them, if you go to a hotel in Copenhagen or a lot of European capital city, I mean, they're all Filipinos. You always have that kind of Asian mix in there, and that Asian kind of part to work in hotels in Europe. I mean, most hotels in France or Italy, I mean, or England, I mean, you don't find any English people working in the hotels in England. I mean, they're mostly all foreigners, you know. I mean, they're Italians or French or whatever like that. I don't know what happens after Brexit, but that's the way it is. So it makes the culture there. So it'll be interesting what happens with that. But the reason I came down here 20 years ago, when I was living in Copenhagen, I was doing finishing off my thesis for my MBA. And then I came down here just for 6 months to help a guy out with a property who was down here, you know. I started working in hotels when I was 14 years old, so almost 10 years ago.
Yeah, 10 years ago.
And my education originally wasn't hotels, but what happened then later on is I wanted to do something like we do now, and I knew that the education for hotels wasn't really it, so then I had to go and do a degree and then an MBA in normal business to set up how to do brands and run companies and so forth, because the hotel education these days is a lot better, but in those days it was like, you know, three months in the housekeeping department to learn how that runs, and 3 months in the front office to learn how that runs. And for me, I was like, okay, man, if you got any kind of brain, you could spend 3 days in the front office, you know how that works. You go 2 days in the housekeeping, okay, you know how the housekeeping department runs. I mean, it's not really a 3-year education for that kind of stuff, but these days they're a lot better. They're degree level, they're, you know, master's level, stuff like that. So it's a lot of things. But yeah, generally, I mean, for us, I mean, when I came down here, it was very interesting because I could see the way hotels are, for example, in Paris or Copenhagen. When you go into a 5-star hotel, it's like, okay, yeah, thanks for checking in. There's the lift. There's your bags. Go ahead, take it away. I mean, there's not much service. I mean, there's some service, but not really. You know, where if you come down to Asia, even in a 2-star hotel, you can still have a doorman. You can still have this. You can have that. You can really create something, and you have the opportunity. You have the infrastructure. You have the resources to be able to create much better, more enjoyable type hotels. You know. That's why it's always funny for me when I'm like, you know, reading reviews online about TripAdvisor, somebody staying at a, you know, pretty decent hotel down here, they're complaining about the breakfast or something like this, and then you go to a 5-star hotel in Europe, it's just like, really?
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, there's no egg, you know, you got your scrambled eggs in the trough, and everybody's here and this, and it's like, these people are the ones coming down to Asia complaining about the services and the standards down here. It's like, yeah, okay.
I know.
But you know, I mean, that was the original reason I came down here. We wanted to come down, and when I met up with Charlie, we had the same kind of ideas and vision about, you know, creating something, you know, with decent hotels, but even if they're 2-star or 5-star, they're still decent standards, you know. Whereas when I was working in 5-star hotels, like in the Savoy Hotel in London, for example, I was like, oh my God, really? You know, for me, that wasn't, you know, when I was 6 years old, I decided to be in the hotel business, and for me at the time, that wasn't really the vision I had of me working in a hotel, you know, that wasn't it. So in Asia, we found it a lot more, and we're very happy doing this kind of stuff down here, you know.
Thank you. Guys, we're almost out of time. We've got a minute and a half left. Quick 10-15 second final question, and it's in 2 parts. Complete the sentence. 2018 will be a year of what for the hotel business in general? And do also share with the audience your favorite hotel in Indonesia, please. Raj.
Starting with me. Let me go with the favorite. I think, you know, I'm biased, but Ritz-Carlton Ubud, Mandapa, is my favorite in this country. I see 18 as a turning point for Indonesia beyond Bali. You know, this year we've experienced almost double-digit growth across our same-store sales, but a big part of that is driven by markets like Bali. Okay. I think as the Indonesian economy transforms a little bit, we'll see some growth coming back in secondary, tertiary markets, and also that's where the real opportunities lie in the future.
Thank you, Raj. Peter, do you have a favorite hotel here? And what do you see for the hotel business next year?
Hey, listen, I think there's a lot of great product in this archipelago. One property I think that's quite nice is the St. Regis here in Bali. Relative to 2018, assuming we don't have some massive hiccup on the Korean Peninsula, I see the year with a healthy dose of optimism. I guess I'm just looking at it through the prism of my own business, but I think that there's going to be some opportunity, and it's a dynamic region. There's a lot going on, and I'm optimistic that we can take advantage of it. And the growth fundamentals continue to be good, and a lot of major economies have finally pulled themselves out of the mire known as the global financial crisis now. So I think, generally speaking, the prospects are good, and other than if there's some major geopolitical hiccup, which isn't out of the question, regrettably, given the leadership that we have in the world right now.
Thank you. Nicholas, your views, please.
I think we all kind of have a perspective from our own experiences, and I had some great experience at the Four Seasons in Sion, and just the setting and the whole wellness piece there was quite strong for me, so I enjoyed that very much, and so I've been a proponent of that hotel, or supporter. And I think next year is, it should be an uptick from this year, just generally speaking for the region. That's my view. The world seems to be becoming a bit more resilient over time. I guess when you are used to things flaring up left, right, and center, over time people become a little bit jaded and press on with their personal and professional travel plans. So hopefully that continues. And of course, big events are shaping travel. I was looking at some of the weather events in the States, for example, that will definitely shift some of the leisure business that typically goes to the Caribbean and Mexico into places like, Bali perhaps, and other Asian resort destinations for the months to come. So things will shape tourism going forward.
Thank you. And John, finally, your word, please.
For us, I see in the next coming years, I see a lot more rebranding in hotels, especially in the 3-star, 4-star level, especially around Indonesia and most places around Asia. And in Indonesia at the moment, there's 10,000 hotels, registered hotels. Only 4% of those are actually branded or connected to some kind of reservation system. But if you compare that to somewhere like America, for example, where it's just 50,000 hotels, and 80% of those hotels in America are branded or connected to some kind of reservation system like Choice or Best Western or something like that. So the statistics in general show that on OTAs, if a hotel is branded, it gets 20% more business off the bat. So in the future, I see around Asia, Indonesia in particular, you'll see the numbers going up to 20%, 25%, 30% by 2020 in branded hotels, which would mean, 2,000, 3,000 hotels are branded instead of the maybe 400 hotels that are currently branded. But I think you'll see that across a lot of Asian countries, but in particular around Indonesia. My favorite hotel at the moment, or has been for a long time since I've been in Indonesia actually, is Amankila. Candi Dasa, which is a nice classic kind of Balinese feel hotel with nice views out over Lombok and the straits there, So
Hey.
I'll be there in a few days' time. If anybody wants to drop by, I'll be happy to buy you a beer at the Amankila. It's quite expensive, but you're welcome to join,
Okay. Gentlemen, our time's up. It's been a pleasure moderating your panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Very good, yeah.
Fine job.